Long before modern science mapped the human family tree, a tiny skeleton lay hidden inside a cave on an island at the edge of the known world. She could not know that her discovery, tens of thousands of years later, would not only ignite the fiercest debate in the history of paleoanthropology, but fundamentally shatter the assumption that had guided a century of evolutionary science: the belief that intelligence requires a large brain. Her catalog number was LB1. The world would come to know her as the Hobbit. LB1 lived on Flores, a remote volcanic island in eastern Indonesia. Flores sits within Wallacea, a biogeographic transition zone of oceanic islands that have never, in all of Earth's history, been connected to the Asian mainland by land bridges. Even during the deepest ice ages, when sea levels dropped over 100 meters, deepwater straits still separated Flores from the rest of the world. Any creature that reached this island, including the Hobbit's ancestors over 1 million years ago, had to cross open ocean. How they did it remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in human evolution. The island itself was a world built on extremes. Flores stretches roughly 14,000 square kilometers, dominated by a volcanic spine of more than 17 active volcanoes. The landscape is rugged: steep jungle valleys carved by rivers, limestone caves pockmarking the hillsides, and thick tropical forest pressing in from every direction. But the animals that lived here were unlike anything found anywhere else on Earth. This was a mirror world, a place where the rules of nature had been inverted. Elephants had shrunk to the size of cows. A species called stegodon, a distant relative of modern elephants that on the mainland stood nearly 4 meters tall, had dwarfed down to barely 1.2 meters at the shoulder, roughly 500 kilograms. Meanwhile, rats had grown to the size of rabbits, weighing over 2 kilograms. A giant stork called Leptoptilos robustus towered at 1.8 meters tall, nearly 6 feet, with a wingspan stretching 3.6 meters. And patrolling the forest floor, the apex predator, the Komodo dragon, over 3 meters long, up to 150 kilograms, the largest lizard on Earth. Then and now, there were no tigers, no leopards, no wolves. The only large predator was the dragon. And moving through this impossible landscape, making stone tools, hunting dwarf elephants, navigating the darkness of limestone caves, was a human species that stood just 1 meter and 6 centimeters tall, 3 feet, 6 inches, with a brain the size of a grapefruit. This was Homo floresiensis. The story of the Hobbit's discovery begins in 2001. Australian archaeologist Michael Morwood partnered with Indonesian archaeologist Thomas Sutikna and senior Indonesian scientist Raden Panji Suwojono to excavate a massive limestone cave called Liang Bua. The name means cool cave in the local Manggarai language, and its dimensions are staggering: 50 meters deep, 40 meters wide. The entrance soars 25 to 30 meters above the jungle floor. The team was not looking for a new species. They were searching for evidence of the earliest modern human migration from Asia to Australia. On September 2nd, 2003. That search changed forever. Field archaeologist Wahyu Saptomo was working 6 meters below the cave floor when his trowel struck something hard embedded in clay: a tiny skull. He called over Rokus Dueawe, the Indonesian faunal expert, who examined the exposed bone and concluded it was a hominin, but almost certainly a child, given the miniature brain case. Sutikna was at a nearby hotel, sick with fever. When the news reached him, his fever, he later recalled, immediately vanished. Over the following days, as the team carefully exposed the cranium and jaw, Rokus made the pivotal realization: every tooth in the jaw was permanent. Adult teeth. Every single one. This was not a child. It was a fully grown adult, approximately 30 years old at the time of death. The bones were unfossilized, soft, fragile. They had the consistency, as one researcher described, of wet blotting paper. To harden the surfaces, Sutikna improvised. He bought acetone nail polish remover from a local cosmetics store and mixed it with field glue. The sediment blocks containing the skeleton were then carried to the team's hotel by minibus, with crew members cradling them on their laps over unpaved roads. For more than a year, the team kept the discovery secret while they prepared their analysis. Physical anthropologist Peter Brown at the University of New England was invited to study the remains. What he found defied every known category. On October 27, 2004, Brown, Sutikna, Morwood, and colleagues published 2 landmark papers in Nature. They designated the specimen LB1, the holotype of a new species, Homo floresiensis. Morwood coined the nickname Hobbit, a nod to Tolkien's famous small folk. Science magazine named it the most important scientific discovery of 2004. But the skeleton's measurements told a story that no one was prepared for. LB1 stood approximately 106 centimeters tall. body weight, estimated at 25 to 30 kilograms. But the truly shocking feature was the brain. High-resolution CT scanning measured an endocranial volume of just 426 cubic centimeters. To put that in perspective, the modern human brain averages 1,300 to 1,400 cubic centimeters. A chimpanzee's brain is roughly 400. The Hobbit's brain was 1/3 the size of yours and squarely in the range of a chimp, and yet this creature made tools, hunted elephants, used fire. Survived for over 700,000 years. How is that possible? The body was even stranger than the skull. LB1's limb proportions did not resemble any known member of the genus Homo. The ratio of upper arm to thigh bone fell squarely in the range of Australopithecus, Lucy's species, a hominin that lived over 3 million years earlier. The legs were short, the arms were relatively long, the silhouette looked less like a modern human and more like something from 3 million years ago. The feet were extraordinary. Studied by William Youngers in a 2009 Nature paper, LB1's left foot was 70% as long as her thigh bone, compared to 55% in modern humans. The feet were flat, no arch, no spring-loaded running stride, and yet the big toe was fully aligned with the other toes. Confirming committed bipedalism. She walked upright. She just walked differently than we do. The wrist bones, analyzed by Matthew Tocheri of the Smithsonian in 2007, were almost indistinguishable from those of African apes. This was not damage. This was not disease. This morphology develops during embryogenesis. It is hardwired from before birth. No known pathology can produce it. The combination was unprecedented. A skull resembling Homo erectus sat atop a body that, in many ways, had more in common with species 3 million years older. This was not supposed to exist. Scientists needed to know how old she was. The original dating placed LB1 at approximately 18,000 years ago. Sensationally recent. But in March 2016, a landmark paper led by Sutikna and Tocheri revealed a critical error. New excavations exposed a hidden erosional surface in the cave's stratigraphy. Younger sediments had been deposited directly atop much older layers, making the original dates misleadingly young. The revised chronology pushed all skeletal remains to between 100,000 and 60,000 years ago. Associated stone tools ranged from 190,000 to 50,000 years ago. This was not some brief anomaly. The Hobbit lineage had persisted on Flores for an almost incomprehensible span of time. And then, in 2016, the timeline stretched even further. A team led by Gerrit van den Berg published findings from Matamenga, a site 75 kilometers east of Liang Bua. A jaw fragment and 6 teeth from at least 3 individuals, dated to approximately 700,000 years ago, showed Hobbit-like features, but were even smaller. The jaw was 21% smaller than the smallest Liang Bua specimen. Then, in 2024, researchers reported the discovery of an adult arm bone from Matamenga that is the smallest upper arm bone known from any adult hominin in the entire fossil record. The Hobbit's ancestors had achieved extreme dwarfism by at least 700,000 years ago and maintained it for over 500,000 years. But the discovery did not bring celebration alone. It brought war. No hominin find in modern history ignited a fiercer scientific battle. The controversy erupted the very day the Nature papers were published. On October 28th, 2004, Michiel Henneberg of the University of Adelaide announced on radio that LB1 was simply a modern human with microcephaly, a condition causing abnormally small brain development. This launched a decade of what became known as the Hobbit Wars. The challengers proposed an escalating series of explanations: microcephaly, Laron syndrome, cretinism, and in 2014, Down syndrome. The Down syndrome claim, published in 2 high-profile papers, provoked extraordinary backlash. The papers had been pushed through the review process by a 90-year-old geologist with no paleontological expertise, who used his academic privilege to select his own referees. Peter Brown called it an outrageous abuse of the peer review process. Dean Falk declared the idea nonsense. William Youngers called it shockingly bad science, but the political drama cut even deeper than the scientific one. In December 2004, just weeks after publication, Tuku Jacob, Indonesia's most powerful paleoanthropologist, removed the Hobbit remains from their repository in Jakarta and transported them 450 kilometers to his own laboratory. Without the Discovery team's permission, he was considered untouchable in Indonesian science. When the bones were finally returned 3 months later under intense international pressure, the damage was devastating. Deep knife cuts scored both sides of LB1's jaw from removing a rubber mold. The chin of a second specimen was snapped off and glued back at the wrong angle. LB1's pelvis was smashed. 2 leg bones were missing entirely. The Indonesian government then banned all access to Liang Bua cave until after Jacob's death in 2007. The science, however, survived. The defense was led by Dean Falk of Florida State University. Her brain endocast studies proved decisive. In 2005, she created a virtual three-dimensional model of LB1's internal brain case and compared it with apes, Homo erectus, modern humans, pygmies, and microcephalics. The result was unambiguous. LB1's brain was not microcephalic. It had well-developed frontal and temporal lobes, with features no diseased brain could produce. And here is where the mystery gave way to revelation. Despite its tiny volume, LB1's brain showed something remarkable. Brodmann's Area 10, the prefrontal region responsible for complex planning, initiative, and learning from mistakes, was approximately the same relative size as in modern humans. Falk described two enormous convolutions in the frontal pole that she had not expected to find. She later said, "I thought the Hobbit's brain would look like a chimpanzee's. I was wrong. The brain had not simply shrunk, it had reorganized. 7 derived cortical features were identified: expanded orbitofrontal cortex, enlarged temporal lobes, a derived lunate sulcus position, what Falk called global neurological reorganization." The Hobbit's brain was not a scaled-down human brain. It was not a scaled-up chimp brain. It was something qualitatively different, a small engine rewired for high performance. This single finding challenged a century of neuroscience. The assumption that intelligence scales with brain volume, that bigger means smarter, was wrong. Intelligence, it turns out, depends not on raw size, but on architecture, on the number and arrangement of neural connections, on the proportions of specific regions, on how the brain is wired, not how much it weighs. A 426 cubic centimeter brain made stone tools, hunted elephants cooperatively, navigated volcanic landscapes, survived among Komodo dragons, and did so successfully for over 700,000 years. Bigger was not better. Better was better. But how did they get so small in the first place? The answer lies in a well-documented evolutionary phenomenon called insular dwarfism, also known as the island rule. First formalized by J. Bristol Foster in 1964, the principle states that large species shrink on islands while small species grow. The drivers are straightforward. Limited resources favor smaller bodies that need fewer calories. The absence of large predators removes the pressure to be big, and smaller individuals reach reproductive maturity faster, a critical advantage in isolated populations. Flores was the textbook case. Elephants shrank to the size of cows. Rats grew to the size of rabbits. Storks grew tall enough to look a human in the eye, and a species of hominin, whatever ancestor first reached those shores over 1 million years ago, shrank to just over a meter tall. The great unresolved question is which ancestor. Two competing hypotheses persist. One holds that the Hobbit descended from Homo erectus, well documented in nearby Java. The other argues that the Hobbit's wrist bones, feet, shoulders, and limb proportions are too primitive for Homo erectus, pointing instead to descent from a more ancient hominin, perhaps Homo habilis, that left Africa in an undocumented migration over 2 million years ago. The debate remains open. Ancient protein extraction from Hobbit teeth may ultimately settle it, and then they disappeared. A groundbreaking 2025 study used speleothem geochemical data to reveal that mean annual rainfall on Flores declined 37% between 76,000 and 61,000 years ago. Severe drought caused freshwater scarcity that stressed both the Hobbit and its primary prey, Stegodon. The landscape shifted from open grassland to closed forest. Then came a volcanic eruption approximately 50,000 years ago, depositing an ash layer that caps the last Stegodon fossils and Hobbit tools at Liang Bua. When the elephants vanished, the entire food web collapsed. The giant stork, the vulture, and likely the hobbits with them. The first evidence of modern human presence at Liang Bua appears above the ash layer. Around 46,000 years ago, there is no direct evidence of contact between the two species, but the timing is suggestive. As one researcher noted, as the hobbits moved in search of water and prey, they may have encountered modern humans. In that sense, climate change set the stage for their final disappearance. But here is something the bones cannot tell us, and the local people can. The Naj people of Central Flores tell stories of creatures called the Ebugogo, a name meaning ravenous grandmother, small, cave-dwelling, hairy, bipedal, about 1.5 meters tall with flat noses, wide mouths, and long arms. They raided villages, stole food, murmured in a language no one could understand. According to legend, the Naja eventually burned them out of their cave, roughly 7 generations ago. One pair allegedly escaped. Gregory IV, professor emeritus of anthropology at the University of Alberta, spent decades studying these legends. he gathered testimony from approximately 30 eyewitnesses among the neighboring Leo people who describe a similar creature. In his 2022 book, Forth concluded that a non-sapiens hominin may have survived on Flores to the present or very recent times. The scientific community is largely skeptical. The revised dating pushes the Hobbit's extinction to at least 50,000 years ago, an almost inconceivable gap for oral tradition, and yet Aboriginal Australian stories have been shown to preserve memories of sea level changes thousands of years old. The possibility, however slim, refuses to die. Homo floresiensis did not merely add a new branch to the human family tree, it revealed that the tree was far bushier, far stranger, and far more recent than anyone had imagined. Within the last 100,000 years, at least 6 human species walked the earth simultaneously. Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, the Hobbit, Homo luzonensis in the Philippines, and possibly late surviving Homo erectus in Java. The march of progress, that tidy parade from ape to modern human, was a myth. The Hobbit demonstrated that brain size is not destiny, that a 400 cubic centimeter brain, reorganized with expanded prefrontal cortex, could sustain tool manufacture, cooperative hunting, and survival for over 700,000 years. It proved that pre-modern hominins crossed open ocean more than 1 million years ago, a feat once thought exclusive to our species, and it transformed island Southeast Asia from an evolutionary backwater into the most surprising hotspot in hominin research. She never wrote her name. She never built a monument. She could not have known that her bones, sealed inside a limestone cave on an island at the edge of the world, would one day force our species to confront an uncomfortable truth. That we were never alone, that intelligence was never our monopoly, and that the most extraordinary chapter in human evolution was written, not by the biggest brain on the planet, but by the smallest. Thank you for watching. If you found this story fascinating, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Until next time.